Helga, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to your studio today. Let's start with your formative influences. In your practice, there's a persistence of liquids. How would you describe how your experience of growing up in Queensland fostered this connection with water?
I was much more conscious of tropical storms and floods. I'm conscious of it being, very much part of the southern hemisphere, because my work deals with the southern and the northern hemisphere extremes. My mother came from the northern hemisphere. It took her many, many years to acclimatise to Queensland. She was a bit obsessed with weather, and she kept a weather diary. It was the extremes of the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere that really started to come through in my work at a certain point. And I have made bodies of work addressing all those things about aspects of Finland and water, and I've translated those ideas through many different materials like fishing line and perspex.
Your topology series, you're in a way mimicking organic processes.
In preparation for each body of work, I will go to the place. It could be Iceland or Finland or Wilson's Prom, and when I'm there, I will document what I see. I bring that back to the studio. I spend a lot of time with that to kind of get a sense of the colours. So all those things come together to get as close as possible to what the source material is. And every body of work is an experimentation. With the topographical paintings, I do the drawings and I trace the drawings, and then I transcribe them onto the paintings, and then they're behind the layers that come after that. Then I work back over the top to bring them back to life. Before I make a body of work, I see it in my mind, but it's not necessarily how it will turn out. It's a starting point.
Yeah. In your work, there's this shift between macro and micro views. I was thinking of the topology series, the way that the line drawings mimic the shape of growth patterns of lichen, but at the same time it forms like a larger scale cartography of, you look at it and you're like, is this a really large land mass that I'm looking at? The sort of lines.
What it does is it takes on a new reading.
Yeah.
Once it's on that scale, it does take on a map-like version of a terrain. Okay, this is part of a new body of work I'm making at the moment, evolved out of a short research trip I made to New York last year to cross-reference the physical geology of Central Park in New York with rock specimens from around the world. It gave the example of how over time, through heat and pressure, rock can be, folded to create siltstone, to marble and slate as granite is lifting up from beneath it, and in effect describes the process of mountain building in a specific area in California. It begins and ends with the same pattern. However, throughout the visual journey through the 3 panels, there's a disruption and a flux, which has always been something that has been part of my work, is that sense of flux. It took some time before perspex really entered my work, but it has sustained throughout my practice. And I come back to it because it's a transparent or translucent material. It has colour, if that's what you choose, and I've used it as a vessel for photographs or wrapping fishing line around.
As domes?
As domes, that's right, that cover the work. I've used it sculpturally, I've used it in 2 dimensions. I've projected animations onto the surface. However, mesh and fishing line, metals, slate, silicon, I've utilised those as well. I think the most significant works I've made with mesh were after a residency in Vietnam in 1995. I discovered a street that only sells mesh and metals. I was drawn to it because it has a translucency, and I could layer it or I could spray paint it. And I could work with it that way. So it goes back to the sensibility I bring to my paintings, or the process that I work with of layering. I won the Moët & Chandon. The winning work I made was a work I made after my experience in Vietnam, called The Perfume River. It was a maturing process going to live in France, I would spend a lot of time walking through the village and observing the lace curtains that everyone has in France. And I was looking at that time, because I'd made the mesh work, so I was looking for an equivalent, a French equivalent to that. Lace is like a mesh in itself. So I made a body of work addressing all of that, but I used the lace as a template, which I spray painted through over and over and over again. The end result was almost like an X-ray, looking through old papered walls from history.
Can we talk a little bit about the way that your work sits within the language of minimalism, yet always retains this sense of the handmade?
Yes, both exist. The minimal, I think in terms of a minimalist aesthetic with my work. So that's my initial approach. However, because they're handmade by me, I consider my work as low-tech, apart from pieces that I have to get laser cut for something. Everything else, even the hand-woven fishing line, it may end up as a finished piece, a minimal piece, but in the process of making it, it's hand-woven. It's not mechanical. There isn't a mechanical aspect to it.
What kinds of creative activity happened in your home when you were growing up?
Both my parents were artistic. They could draw and paint. They didn't have any formal training. It was a very nurturing home in regards to making art as a child. Only thing I wanted to do was to be an artist. I didn't have a plan B. And no doubt it was a result of the environment that I grew up in.